Welcome to Wider View, the program that provides perspectives on the news outside the narrow confines of the mainstream media. I'm your host, Charles Dunaway. Today I'm very pleased to welcome Catherine Shakdam to the broadcast. Catherine is a political analyst and commentator for the Middle East, a fellow at the Bayan Centre for Planning and Studies, the author of A Tale of Grand Resistance, Yemen, the Wahhabi, and the House of Saud. Catherine is also the Director of Communication for the Journalist Support Committee, a former consultant on Yemen for the United Nations Security Council, and a PhD candidate based in London. Catherine is also a frequent contributor to web-based news media such as New Eastern Outlook and Citizen Truth. Now let's go to the interview we recorded on New Year's Day. Americans have been reminded of Saudi Arabia recently, primarily because of the murder and dismemberment of Jamal Khashoggi in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. That has triggered now a realization in the West, finally, about the 3.5-year war against Yemen. I see a lot of writing in which both of these are attributed to an immature and perhaps irresponsible person in the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman. But is that your take, or do these represent sort of a logical extension of Saudi policy and Saudi governance?
Well, the first thing, when it comes to Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, he's really the product, of the Saudi regime, in that he's the privileged prince that, reacts rather than think. He doesn't understand, he's been surrounded by people who do his bidding all the time. He's been praised for anything and everything. So he's not used to be criticized or even challenged in his worldview. And so, he has become, I think, like the epitome of what Saudi Arabia is in terms of its this system of governance. It's a violent reactionary theocracy. And that's what he is. So he refuses anything and anyone that is not like him, who does not agree with him. He is a wannabe king that is very much the embodiment of, tribal and Bedouin law, in that he believes that he has right of life and death over his people, and whoever he feels falls under, his authority. And so that works for Yemen, and that explains the why of the violence and the, systematic, bombing and aggression against civilians. He wants people to bow down to his will. So as far as the MBS is concerned, I think he's everything that all princes are, maybe to a greater extent. So he's maybe just a little bit more than the others, but he's really like the others. I don't think he's more stupid or more violent or more bloodthirsty than his cousins and nephews and uncles and brothers and sisters and whatnot, because they're all part of the same system. They've all been raised under the same, value and ideas that they can do whatever, whenever, with whomever. And this is the problem that, we have created, because we have failed to challenge that worldview. And we have systematically, gone on with the idea that the Saudi were a good, were a good idea, essentially, that they were our friends and that we could manage their crazy and that we could use them to our advantage, when I don't think that, I think it was wrong to begin with, but I don't think that we can justify this anymore. There is no reason why we should be friends with the Saudi. As far as natural resources go, America is self-sufficient now. America gets its most of its energy needs from Canada anyway, because of the fracking. So Saudi Arabia is irrelevant. When it comes to the economy, Saudi Arabia is dying. It has a deficit of over $30 billion, and it's actually, it's expanding every day because of the war in Yemen. And the Saudi have the most dangerous ideology underpinning their regime, which is Wahhabism. And Wahhabism has given birth to Islamic radicalism all across the world. So it would stand to reason to view Saudi Arabia as a threat against not just America's national security, but all of our national security.
Right.
But we have failed. And I'm not sure that I have the answer to that, other than money, in that the Saudi lobby has bought out silences and bought out media favors, and that it needs to stop. So it has kind of stopped with Jamal Khashoggi, because I think that suddenly people realized that enough is enough, and that was too much. It was too close for comfort, in that it was too out there, too violent, too bloody against one of the the member of the elite for anyone to look away anymore. Which is why now Yemen has become a subject of discussion, because now suddenly people are opening their eyes and realizing, oh my God, the Saudi are doing this in our name, with our weapon and our blessing. And so I think people want to walk away now.
Yes, but it seems to me that the one thing that keeps the U.S. On the Saudi side is the problem. Well, if it is a problem, but the conflict with Iran that is uppermost in the minds of a lot of U.S. Policymakers, and I think coupled with that is the relationship with Israel. I find it difficult to find a reason why the U.S. should be fighting against Iran other than Israel.
There is no other reason. I mean, if you look at it pragmatically, from a rational perspective, forget about all the upsets and and emotions. Iran, number one, is not a belligerent country. Hasn't declared war against anyone for over 300 years. The same cannot be said of America and Israel, for that matter.
Right.
Iran has, since the inception of its system of governance, 1979, actually played by the rule of law, international law, that is. And no one can fault Iran on that, because otherwise I think that war would have been declared a long time ago. So Iran on paper, I mean, I understand that people might not agree with the system of governance, might actually have an issue with the fact that there is no real separation of powers when it comes to religious and the politics. I understand that. I understand that people have an issue with that kind of democracy because they're not familiar, they do not agree with it. That being said, the same can be said about Saudi Arabia. Iran is a republic. Saudi Arabia is a violent theocracy that doesn't allow an opposition, a political opposition. So you cannot actually blame this, the sins of one country, Iran, in the name of democracy, and actually tolerate that of the other, Saudi Arabia, and actually say that it makes sense. It doesn't make sense. We have to be, either we actually follow through our belief system and say, we will not tolerate, friendship with countries such and such, and actually follow through on that and be consistent, or we actually understand that this animosity against Iran is actually, has only one purpose, and one purpose alone, is that to please Israel. And if we were to put it in that, kind of narrative, then maybe we could have a real discussion on whether we should or shouldn't, be aggressive towards Iran, because really we're talking about Israel national security. But even if you look at it from this perspective, Iran doesn't want to declare war on Israel. It could have. I mean, it could still, but it doesn't, and it didn't. So it didn't for many great years. Why would it start now? I mean, Iran has been around for almost 40 years now, and it hasn't declared war on Israel when it could have done so for, many, many years ago for many great reasons on many occasions, and it didn't. So, we need to be a little bit more rational about what Iran actually wants to do. It hasn't done it when it was in Syria, helping to fight ISIS militants, and it was literally next door to Israel. It didn't do anything. Why would it do it now? It makes no sense, other than this, this ridiculous fear that the Israelis are holding over all of our heads, saying that Iran is very, very bad. We don't know why, and we don't actually know how it is very bad, but we have to say that, yes, it is very, very bad. I don't think it is, personally, because they haven't shown us anything bad other than that they are a country who wish, like every other country in the world, to expand their influence and kind of promote their way of thinking. But this is what any country wants to do anyway. Mm-hmm. So I think there are other ways to reduce the influence of Iran if people think it's that bad. We don't have to use the military. We don't have to use sanctions all the time. It's actually counterintuitive and counterproductive. What we should do is try to understand and maybe, try to not radicalize people's way of thinking by isolating them. What about trying to understand them?
Well, that would make a lot of sense.
It would.
I think one of the things too. I mean, Iran is constantly. I mean, when we talk about the Saudi war on Yemen, we're constantly reminded, every single article I read says the Iran-backed Houthis,
Okay.
right.
Okay, let me
So,
cut you here, because it infuriates me so much. Where is Iran in Yemen? I mean, I'm not saying that, I'm not against, someone making the case for Iran's influence in Yemen. Why not? I mean, if someone has an argument, let's make it. But there is not one Iranian troop in Yemen. There is no actually proof, and I'm talking about real proof, not cartoons at the United Nations, real proof of Iran sending money, sending weapons, sending troops, sending food, sending anything. There is actually no proof whatsoever. If so, I promise you, it would have been everywhere all the time, and we would be reminded of it every single time of day. But we're not, because those proofs don't exist whatsoever. The same cannot be said about American soldiers, British soldiers, French soldiers, whatever soldiers we have in Yemen. We have, child soldiers paid by Saudi Arabia, Sudanese child soldiers that, suffered in Darfur, that were sent to Yemen, at the behest of Saudi Arabia. We have mercenaries from all over the world coming to Saudi Arabia. We even have proof that Israel provided not just weapons, but men and experts to enable Saudi Arabia's air raids in Yemen and troop movements in Yemen. For this, we actually have proof, and we can demonstrate. We can actually make a real case and a real argument. The same cannot be said of the Iranians. So why are people insisting on this fallacy? Because it's not true. We know it's not true. Yemen do not have a history, diplomatic or political history, even from an ideological sense. The resistance movement in Yemen is very different from, let's say, Hezbollah, or let's say, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. They don't abide by the same school of thought religiously. They don't abide by the same principle politically. They are eons away when it comes to their culture and traditions. The Yemeni are very different from the Iranians, and they don't actually even like each other particularly. So they understand that both are fighting a common enemy, in the sense that they don't like the Saudi and they don't like to have Western interventionism. But that stops here. It's not about, they don't really have common grounds politically, ideologically, religiously, socially. So I'm not quite sure how Iran is trying to invade Yemen, because everyone has tried in Yemen. The Ottoman tried, they failed, and they were closer to Yemen, culturally speaking and religiously speaking, than Iran. They failed. So I don't know why people keep banging on that tree, because that tree doesn't exist. I mean, I would like to think that maybe Iran would like it to be so, but Yemen is a very big beast. And it's not, it has always been a very independent country. And I don't think that it would be in Iran's interest even to attempt to bring Iran kind of in the fold, because it's too unstable. It's too unpredictable for anyone to even attempt to do so. So I don't know why. And we have UAE troops in Yemen. We have Saudi troops trying to cut away at Yemen's sovereignty. Iran is not doing that. Iran is not doing anything. If anything, Iran is trying to defend Yemen's sovereignty, on principle at the United Nations, making the case that Yemen is a sovereign nation that should not be trampled on by foreign troops. It's not trying to do anything else but to bring the war to an end, because it's not good for the region as a whole. But Iran is not really concerned about what happens in Yemen. It doesn't change anything for Iran per se. So I don't quite understand the logic, other than to try to make the argument that the Saudi had to go and had to commit horrible war crimes and acts of genocide on the off chance that the Iranian might have want to, maybe, we're not quite sure yet, do something in Yemen, but we don't know what is, exactly what they wanted to do, but we're just thinking that they might have at some point in time. It's ridiculous.
Right. Very much so. Yeah, there are some historical and, religious issues there, having to do primarily with the Saudi self-understanding in regard to Islam.
I don't even know if you can call it understanding, to be quite honest with you, because I think, it's not the case that they're reading the Quran backwards. It's just, it's not. I don't think they're reading it at all. Because they have a very warped, very sadistic, I'm going to say, and vengeful understanding of what, the divine or the religious is. Mm-hmm. Because I don't think there is any religion in the world, worthy of the name, that is actually advocating bloodshed. And this is what the Saudi are advocating. Wahhabism is advocating bloodshed, for those communities who do not abide by their worldview.
Mm-hmm.
And it's insanity, because to believe that people will be brought to a religion by the sword is insane in itself.
Yes.
But yeah, they're advocating it. But we supporting this worldview, Western powers, we are complicit in those crimes, because we enabled that house, the House of Saud, to actually stand on its 2 feet and grow and expand into our borders, and actually, violate those borders with their ideology. We allowed this to grow, and now we're calling it a problem, but we helped create that problem.
Right.
But we're not doing anything when it comes to challenging that ideology. We call it Islamic radicalism. It's not. It's Wahhabism.
And in fact, I think we support it in a lot of ways.
We let them in. Did you know that in England, about 95% of all Islamic centers and mosques are funded by Saudi Arabia? And that means that the literature in those mosques being taught to children, being taught to imams and whatnot, is directly linked to Wahhabism. So this is what we're teaching. We're allowing, kids to be taught. And we're allowing this. We're giving those guys visas. We're allowing them to stay. We're giving them residence, and we're protecting them with our laws. There is we need to draw the line when it comes to freedom of expression, I think, because it's a great thing. It's a beautiful thing when it's done with the sense of responsibility, that what we say needs to be respected, but we shouldn't call for violence against others, and we shouldn't trample on others' civil rights. And Wahhabism is doing just that, and yet we tolerate it. We would not dream of allowing Nazism to be taught at schools, and yet we're allowing Wahhabism to be taught at schools. Well, we need to draw the line somewhere at some point and wake up.
You're listening to Wider View, a weekly conversation with analysts and activists rarely found in the mainstream media. Wider View is made available free of charge to radio stations nationwide, and a podcast of this show is available on iTunes, Spotify, and Google Play Music as Wider View Radio, and at widerviewradio.podbean.com. You can also follow us on Facebook at Wider View Radio. Now back to our interview with Catherine Shakdam. One of the things that I cannot reconcile too is that the Saudis are the prime sponsors, it's quite clear, of terrorism in Europe, also in the Middle East, the Syrian alleged opposition forces, which were very much supported by the Saudis, yet we are in there helping them.
Absolutely.
And for some reason, after all of the years of U.S. involvement in Syria now, and the thousands of troops, we've been unable to defeat ISIS, apparently.
Because that wasn't the end goal. That's the problem.
Well, of course.
That's
right.
Because people keep asking, why is it that troops are still in Afghanistan and in Syria and in Iraq to defeat, ISIS or the likes of ISIS? It's because it was never the end game. The goal was something else. The goal was to actually control, this region of the world because of the natural resources that it has. It was not. It had nothing to do with democracy. I would love. It would have been lovely, but it wasn't. And it had nothing to do with protecting people from, ISIS or Al Qaeda or the likes. It had everything to do with using that as an excuse to be there and allowing this problem to endure so that we would justify military interventionism.
Right. Well, even Senator Lindsey Graham recently, I think just this weekend, said on CNN, in response to Trump's, withdrawal or intended withdrawal, or however you want to characterize it, from Syria, was that we really need to stay because if we don't stay, it would be devastating to Israel, and it would, give Iran a leg up. Basically.
Exactly. So now you understand. Do you understand? Yes. See, the rebuke was not to to ISIS or the fact that, it was a threat against national security for the US, but it has to do with, oh my God, we're allowing our, ally Israel to be basically, standing alone in the region, surrounded by enemies potentially. Right. So, those comments are actually very telling of the why we went to war in the first place. But what's interesting is that even though Donald Trump is withdrawing from Afghanistan and Syria, he's actually beefing up in Iraq. and there's been a lot of movement in Iraq recently in the past week or so, where you have now about 20,000 troops, and those 20,000 troops happen to have diplomatic visa, courtesy of the former prime minister, Mr. Haidar al-Abadi, who actually gave 20,000 soldiers diplomatic immunity, essentially. So looking at history and what soldiers in the past have done in Iraq, US soldiers, in terms of war crimes and acts of malevolence against civilians, it's a little bit concerning to give 20,000 troops diplomatic immunity.
Right.
And, troops have gone from Kuwait into the Iraq as well, with all kinds of, heavy artillery and tanks and whatnot. So, there's movement. So I don't think that there's a letting out, really. I think it's just the front is moving closer to Iran now.
Right. Well, we're starting a new year, and maybe I can ask you for a few predictions. Do you think Mohammed bin Salman will be forced out, or do you think he will become king? And what do you think? The U.S. Middle East policy situation is going to be during the next several months?
Okay, so the first, I'm going to answer the second part of your question first.
All right.
I think, and I've been saying this for a while, I think the US missed the boat when it comes to its influence in the Middle East, and I think the whole Asian bloc in general. And I think that the US will continue to suffer defeats, both diplomatically and militarily in the region, because it's not. There is a lack of trust, and no one takes the US seriously now with Donald Trump in the White House, because he's very erratic and very emotional. He always reacts, he doesn't think. In that, he's very similar to Mohammed bin Salman, by the way.
Yes.
But so I think that America will continue to be more isolated and kind of out of touch. And I think what we're seeing is the death of an empire. So America is going to have to either reinvent itself, which I don't think so, because it would require a lot of political courage, or basically kind of withdraw within its borders and kind of, go quiet a little bit. I do think that we're going to see a lot more coming from Russia, China, and Iran when it comes to that region. And that could be a good thing with Turkey. So it's too early to tell, but let's see. But I don't think it's going to be worse, to be quite honest with you, because nobody wants war in the backyard. So if anything, they're going to try to promote a bit more, maybe financial cooperation, commerce, these kind of things, which is good for the region. People need to get out of poverty if we want to get rid of instability. Now, when it comes to Mohammed bin Salman, I could see him try to take the crown by force, by either assassinating his dad or kind of, declaring himself king. I wouldn't put it past him, because he's very ambitious, but I don't think that would hold. And I think that eventually he will go. He has so many enemies within his own family. He has violated so many, kind of like bylaws of Al Saud by imprisoning his cousins and basically taking all their money away. He made many very powerful enemies, and I don't think that they will forget anytime soon. I think they will gang up and convince the US that the US needs to back another horse. And I don't think that the US needs a lot of convincing right now. So I think he's dead in the water, and I think I could see him either being forced out of power soon, or Saudi Arabia to kind of degenerate into a civil war. It's very possible. It's overdue. People are quite fed up with the leadership. They're sick of living, in the kind of dark ages. They want to join, the 21st century and actually be able to breathe freely and think for themselves and move for themselves and not be, stifled by this kind of violent theocracy. It makes no sense in the 21st century to have this kind of, system of governance. People are sick of it. So I think that Mohammed bin Salman would be the unfolding of the entire regime, if I'm honest. People have said it long ago, and I think that now the time is ripe. And I think that Saudi Arabia is going to see its, its Arab Spring. It's going to be a late one, but I think it's going to be a very interesting one. Because when it's going to go, it's going to go. The Saudi are quite fed up. I mean, can you imagine? They have actually the name of the owners imprinted on their country. It's unheard of historically. they can't stand it anymore. I mean, I've talked to many Saudi, and they can't. There's such dichotomy in between what the people want for their future and what it is right now. It's they cannot fill this gap with a few reforms. It needs like a complete change, and I don't think they're willing to do it because they're surrounded by clerics who only understand bloodshed, and royals who want to hold on to power no matter what. Something's going to have to give. So
right. Well, I hope you're right about that. I mean, I think
I really hope so, because it would be a breath of fresh air in the region, and I do think that it would make things so much easier, for everyone, because nobody wants wars anymore. I think that we need to move away from this narrative that Israel is always in danger. No, Israel is in danger because Israel is aggressive all the time and violating international law all the time. If Israel was minding its own business and trying to make friends as opposed to enemies, maybe things would be better.
Mm-hmm. Well, that would be a good thing. That's for sure. Would. Well, because sometimes I think having an unstable ruler can be seen as an opportunity, and I hope the Saudis and perhaps the Americans will take advantage of what they've been given. That would be a nice thing for the new year.
Yes, it would.
Good. Well, Catherine, I very much thank you for joining me, for talking with me today.
It was a pleasure.
I really enjoyed it, and I hope we can do this again in the future.
Definitely. Just let me know. I would love to.
All right, great. Thanks so much.
Okay.
You've been listening to an interview with Catherine Shakdam. Catherine is a political analyst and commentator for the Middle East, a fellow at the Bayan Centre for Planning and Studies, the author of A Tale of Grand Resistance, Yemen, the Wahhabi, and the House of Saud. Catherine is also the Director of Communication for the Journalist Support Committee and a former consultant on Yemen for the United Nations Security Council, as well as being a PhD candidate based in London. Catherine Shakdam is also a frequent contributor to web-based news media such as New Eastern Outlook and Citizen Truth, and I strongly recommend that you go to New Eastern Outlook at journal-neo.org or to citizentruth.org and see some more of her work. That's our show for this week. If you have comments or questions about what you've heard, email me at widerviewradio@gmail.com or comment on our Facebook page at Widerview Radio. I'm your host, Charles Dunaway. Thank you for listening.